لا من يجمع المال ويلقى فيه أهوالا سنون العمر ماضية وكأس الموت قد سالا.
Before we took a break, we were discussing about conventional and the difference between conventional perspective and Islamic perspective on wealth. And we highlighted two differences. The first difference between Islamic perspective on wealth and conventional perspective on wealth is with regards to the owner of wealth. Who is the true owner of wealth? We said we as Muslims believe the true owner of wealth is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are simply trustees, holding it as trust, and we will be responsible and accountable before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to explain how we have managed this wealth. While the conventional thinkers, non-Muslims, think they are the owners, they are in charge. You can't ask them how they should use it, and they don't believe if they will be asked how they have used it and so on. However, for us, we believe it is Allah who is the owner of wealth. Another difference which I mentioned is the purpose. We Muslims believe that the purpose of wealth is to draw us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to use it according to what Allah's want and avoid using wealth on areas that Allah doesn't want. So we use wealth to seek pleasures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. While the conventional thinkers, those who are non-Muslims, think that wealth can be used as they like. So don't put restriction on them. The only restriction they know is the country's laws, not God's law. So those were these were the two areas where Islamic perspective differs with conventional perspective on wealth. To continue, what is the significance of wealth to a Muslim? What are the risks associated with wealth to a Muslim? To begin with the importance of wealth to a Muslim, Muslim scholars have articulated three importance of wealth. They say the first significance as to why we should seek wealth is, number one, to meet basic necessities of life, such as food, clothes, shelter, marriage, medical services. We all know that we need wealth to be able to meet these basic necessities of life. So that is the first significance of wealth. And the believer is allowed to use wealth so that he can buy food, can buy decent clothes, he can have a good home, he can marry, and also be able to meet medical expenses, among others. Number two, the second significance of wealth is to enable a believer perform devotional acts that brings him closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as Umrah and Hajj, supporting relatives, supporting orphans, poor, construction of masjid, construction of waqf properties, financing propagation of faith, da'wah activities. So this is the second significance of wealth, that a believer, if he is to seek and is encouraged to seek wealth so that he can be able to perform these devotional acts that brings him closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is unfortunate if a believer seeks wealth just for purpose of meeting basic necessities and ignore this important function of wealth, which is to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by enabling you to go to perform Hajj or Umrah, supporting your relatives, the needy and the orphans, and so on and so forth. And the third significance of wealth is to prevent someone from poverty and it is associated tribulations, such as being unable to drink, unable to eat, unable to dress. So it is from this discussion, the significance of wealth is as I have articulated before. So a believer is also someone who is eager to seek wealth so that he doesn't live in poverty. If you live in poverty, people look down at you. You will not be able to eat nicely, of which you need to eat so that you can have required energy to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you are not able to work hard and generate wealth, poverty will again cause so many tribulations. You will be tempted, may God forbid, to steal or to engage in corruption, which are all prohibited action in Islam. So we are to seek wealth in order to avoid poverty and avoid poverty tribulations. Having highlighted the importance of wealth, let me now share with you risks associated with wealth. By risks, I mean you have to be very careful. You have to be very careful, or you will lose your hereafter, or you will lose the world, or you will lose both. And a believer is someone who seeks moderation, who seeks goodness in this world and goodness in the hereafter. So we have to be very careful that wealth doesn't put us in these situations. Situation number one, risk number one, which we need to be very familiar with, is diversion from remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you become too much preoccupied with counting notes and coins, to that extent whereby adhana is announced, and you feel very hard to leave your coins and your notes to go to pray Jama'ah, then you are in a big trouble, because the call to prayer has been announced and you are busy selling or busy buying. That is a danger. And on this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tulhikum amwalukum wala awladukum an dhikrillah. Let neither your property or your children divert you from remembrance of God. So a believer should be very, very, very cautious not to leave his devotional duties or to neglect his devotional duties for purpose of seeking wealth. Just being there, doing whatever business or doing whatever job, and the time to pray Jama'ah, he is missing it. Or even the time to pray that salah completely passes and he's still busy in his shop or in his company or in his job and so on. So this is risk number one, which is diversion from remembrance of Allah. We should be very, very cautious that wealth should not drag you to forget remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Risk number two associated with wealth is spending in sinful manner. It is very dangerous that you work very hard, you get your money, and then you go and spend that money in something that Allah prohibited. Say, for example, you'll find some Muslims, they use the money they have earned to buy cigarette. Cigarette is a sinful thing. Why are you buying a cigarette? Others are buying drugs. Why are you buying drugs? That's a sinful act. Others are giving that money to women or to lure men or lure women so that they can engage in sinful acts. So this is something to be very, very, to be very far away, and you might find some of us using the money, using the wealth to engage in these activities. So we should be very careful. Wealth puts you at a risk of spending in sinful manner if you don't have piety. So another risk which is associated on spending, apart from sinful manner, is extravagant spending, israf. When you have riches, you should be very careful on engaging on israf. And israf is basically spending on something which is lawful beyond the need. Okay, so if you are buying food, you are buying very, 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 either large in quantity which you don't need, or you just don't need the whole of it, but you just want to show that you are able to afford to buy such particular food and so on. So israf is something to be very cautious about. Even in dressing, some people are buying too many dresses which they don't need. They end up in their cabin shelves, and they are just simply feeling happy to look at them. And while there are a lot of other Muslims who are struggling to afford to have a nice clothes even during the Eid celebrations. So we as Muslims, if we have riches, we are wealthy, we should be very careful to avoid engaging in extravagant activities. Another thing which you need to be very careful on spending is on luxurious items, which is taraf, engaging in extreme luxurious lifestyle, buying things which are very, very expensive, okay, which you can have another item of the same but not at that particular price. So a Muslim needs to be very careful not to engage in sinful manner. Don't use your money to spend on sinful manners, the likes of which I gave an example, or use the money, the wealth you have extravagantly, which is not good at all, or use your money to buy luxurious items. Okay, and we know if you look at your neighbors, if you look at your neighborhood, you will find always a needy Muslim or a needy relative that requires us to support and bring them, not necessarily where we are, but to a honorable lifestyle. So a Muslim needs to be very careful with regards to his wealth on this area of spending. Lastly, a last risk associated with wealth is change of behavior. You might find someone who is a hard worker or a successful business person. He has wealth, he is rich, okay. He starts changing his behavior. He used to meet his fellow Muslims when he was just somewhere there. But now, since he is rich and wealthy, he starts showing some signs of arrogance, pride. He looks people down, and he starts thinking that wealth is due to his own knowledge or due to his own networks. And he starts even thinking that he deserves to be wealthy. Now, a Muslim needs to be very careful here, that your wealth should not change your behaviors from good behaviors to bad ones. Wealth is a trial. you are tested by the wealth you have been given. And so make sure you don't fall into these particular risks. In the next program, insha'Allah ta'ala, we are going to discuss wealth generation, how to generate wealth from an Islamic perspective. Until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
إلى من يجمع المال ويلقى فيه أهوالا سنون العمر ماضية وكأس الموت قد سالا